Her name was Esther. She was 18 years old, and she kept the books of a cotton mill that a grown man could not keep. On the afternoon this story turns on, she was made to carry a tray of tea to 9 seated guests, and then to leave the room before they drank it. She wore a grey apron. They had given her that apron when she was 7. She carried the tray with 2 hands, set it down without a sound, and withdrew. She did not flinch. She did not spill a drop. The mistress of the house was called Clement Marsden. She liked to be admired, and she had a way of making a girl into a story she could tell. As Esther reached the door, Adelaide's voice followed her across the room. "This is our charity girl," she said, to the whole table. "We took her in out of Christian duty. She is useful about the house." The guests smiled the way people smile at a well-trained dog. Nobody at that table knew that the girl at the door had, the night before, balanced the mill's accounts that the master's own son could not add. 9 people heard it said. Count them. That number matters later. One of the 9 was a Manchester merchant. His eyes did not follow Esther. They went instead to a ledger left open on the sideboard, a great book of ruled columns in a small clean hand. He looked at it once. Then he looked at it again, longer, and something moved in his face. He set down his cup. He opened his mouth to ask a question that no one at that table wanted asked. I'll tell you what he said. But not yet. If you've ever been treated as invisible by your own family, this story is for you. Before we go on, do one thing for me. Subscribe so the next story finds you. And tell me in the comments the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to the beginning and show you how a girl becomes a word. She came from a foundling home in the north. That is all anyone ever knew of her start. She was left there as an infant, wrapped in something that was taken away and never returned, and she was given a name by a clerk who wrote it in a book, Esther, and a surname, because the law wanted one. Croft, she did not choose either. But they were hers, and for the first 7 years of her life, people said both. The Marsdens took her at 7. Josiah Marsden owned a mill in the town of Harnworth, a stone building by a brown river, and he owned a house up the hill from it. He and his wife had a son and no daughter, and Adelaide had a fancy that year for doing good where it could be seen. So they went to the foundling home, and they chose a quiet girl with steady hands. They did not choose her because they loved her. They chose her because she did not cry, and because a girl who does not cry is easy to keep. The first thing they did was give her the apron. It was grey, it was plain, it was cut down from a larger one, and the hem was turned twice because it was still too long for a child of 7. Adelaide knelt in front of her in the front hall on the good tiles and tied it round her waist herself. And she smiled while she did it. "There," she said. "Now you look like you belong here." That was the lie, told kindly, on the very first day. She did not look like she belonged. She looked like she had a place. There is a difference, and the difference was the apron. They took the other thing that day too, though it was quieter, and Esther did not understand it for years. Adelaide said, "We shall just call her Esther in the house. Croft is not needed here." And so the surname the clerk had given her was folded up and put away, the way you put away a thing you mean never to use. In that house she had no second name. She was Esther, and then she was less than that. She was the girl. She learned the house before she learned her letters. She learned which chairs she was not to sit in. She learned that the family took the front stairs and she took the back. She learned where the family did not sit, which was everywhere they were, and she learned to be in a room without being in it. She was good at that. She had already been alone in a large building full of children. Being invisible in a house full of Marsdens was, in some ways, less lonely than that. They taught her letters. I want you to notice how they taught her, because it tells you everything. They did not teach her because a child should learn. They taught her because a child who could read could carry a written order to the butcher, and a child who could cipher could check the housekeeping book, and both of those things saved Adelaide trouble. She was taught exactly as far as she was useful, and not 1 inch past it. And then something happened that they did not expect, and did not, at first, even notice. She was better at it than anyone in the house. She rose first, every morning, before the family and before the other 2 servants. She went down in the dark, and she banked the office fire so the master would find the room warm. She learned the shape of the counting house before she was 10. She learned it the way a child learns a song, without trying, just by hearing it over and over. The mill was called Marsden and Son. The son was Clement, and Clement could not add. I will be plain about that, because it is the beam the whole roof rests on. Clement Marsden, the heir, the boy raised to take the mill, could not make a column of figures come to the same total twice. He would add downward and get one sum. He would add upward and get another. He would take the difference for a mystery of arithmetic and leave it. Josiah knew this about his son and would not say it aloud, because to say it aloud was to admit that the son in Marsden and Son was a name painted on a door and nothing behind it. Josiah also would not pay a clerk. A clerk cost money, and a clerk knew your business, and Josiah did not like either. So the books of the mill went unkept, a little at a time, month by month, and the little grew, the way little things do. Esther was 15 the first night she kept them properly. It began as an errand. Clement had left the counting house in a temper, and the day's takings were in a muddle on the desk, and Josiah told the girl to tidy them before the master of the bank came in the morning. Tidy them. That was the word he used, as if the accounts were a room. She sat down at the high desk on the tall stool, and she looked at the columns, and she saw at once what was wrong. Not because anyone had taught her. Because she could see. Some people can see how figures fit together, the way some people can see how a wall is built. She took a fresh pen. She went back to the last page that closed clean weeks before, and she worked forward through every day since, entry by entry, until the book balanced. It balanced to the penny. She did not tell them she had done it. She had learned by then not to bring herself forward. She left the book squared on the desk, and she went up to her cold room under the roof. In the morning Josiah opened it and saw it neat, and assumed the boy had finally applied himself. He said as much to Clement at breakfast, and Clement, who had done nothing, took the praise. Because a man who cannot do figures learns early to take the credit for figures done. And Esther, at the sideboard, pouring, said nothing. That is how it started. And once a house discovers a thing it can lean on, it leans harder. By 16 she kept the books every night. She kept them after the fires were out and the family were abed, at the high desk by a single candle, her breath showing in the cold. She kept the mill's ledgers, and she kept the housekeeping book, and she kept, in her own head, a great many things nobody knew she kept. Clement signed the pages. He signed the bottom of a page she had already filled from top to margin, his name a great loose flourish under her small exact hand. And he thought, when he thought at all, that the books kept themselves. It was never spoken of at table. That is the whole of it, and I want you to hold it, because it is the weapon of this story, set down as if it were nothing. The mill's books were in her hand every night. The son signed the page the girl had already filled, and no one, in 11 years, ever said so out loud. Now let me show you the small cruelties, because a girl is not made into a word all at once. She is made into a word slowly, one witness at a time. The first witness was no witness at all. It was the day of the apron, which you already have. Remember it, because the apron comes back. The second was a christening. Adelaide had a cousin whose child was christened at the church down the hill, and there was a gathering after at the house, and the family put on their good faces for company. Esther, then perhaps 11, was set to hand round the cake. She did it well, as she did everything, quiet and quick and never in the way. and an old gentleman, a guest, a kind man with a soft voice, took a slice from her plate and looked at her properly, which almost nobody did, and asked her a gentle question. He asked her whose girl she was, and did she like her lessons. She answered him. Of course she answered him. She was a child, and a kind grown man had spoken to her as if she were real, and she told him yes, she liked her figures best. It was the truest sentence she had said all week. Adelaide was across the room, and she came over, smiling, and she put her hand on the old man's arm, and she said, warm as anything, you must forgive her, she speaks out of turn. She is only the charity girl. We are teaching her manners as well as letters. And she laughed, and the old man laughed, because that is what you do, and Esther stood with the empty plate and understood something new. She understood that she could be corrected in front of a stranger for the crime of being spoken to. She understood that the sentence she is only the charity girl was a door, and that the door could be shut on her in company, and that no one would think it cruel because it was said with a smile. She did not cry. She had learned already that crying did not help and was sometimes noted against her. She carried the plate to the kitchen, and she stood by the copper for a moment where no one could see her face, and then she went back for the next round of cake. That is the second witness. One, and the debt, if you want to call it that, the debt of what was owed to her and never paid, went up by a christening. The third comes to the tea, and I will bring you back to it now, because you have been waiting since the first minute of this story to hear it whole. Esther was 18. It was a Thursday in autumn, and Adelaide had 9 to tea. This was a matter of some pride to her. Josiah had been doing business with men in Manchester, and 2 of them were come to Harnworth, and Adelaide had made a party of it, and asked the vicar and his wife and a few of the town's better families so that the Manchester men should see the Marsdens were well placed. The house was got up, the good china was down from the top shelf, and Esther, who kept the very housekeeping book that had paid for that tea, who had gone to the grocer herself and haggled the price of it, was told to carry it in. She wore the grey apron. It was not the same apron from when she was 7, but it was the same grey, the same plain cut, because Adelaide liked her servants marked, and Esther, in the house, was a servant when servants were wanted, and a charity to be praised when charity was wanted, and both of those that afternoon. At once she came in with the tray. It was heavy. 9 cups, and the pot, and the milk, and the sugar, and the plate of thin bread and butter she had cut herself. She crossed the room in front of the seated company, and she set the tray on the low table without a rattle, and she stepped back toward the door, because she was not to remain while the family took tea with guests. That was the rule. She had never once broken it, and as she reached the door, Adelaide said it. To the whole room, in that warm, pleased voice, "This is our charity girl. We took her in out of Christian duty. She is useful about the house." 9 people heard it. The vicar and his wife, 2 Harnworth families, Josiah, who did not look up, Clement, who smiled at his tea, and 2 Manchester merchants, one of whom was named Thomas Wingate, of Wingate and Hale. Esther stood at the door for the length of one breath. She did not cry. I want you to hear that again, because it is the whole of her. She did not cry. She looked once at the room, at the 9 of them warm and seated and drinking the tea she had bought and carried, and she went out, and she shut the door softly behind her, because even then, even at that, she would not let it bang. And she thought, on the other side of the door, one small dry thought. She thought, I balanced the books last night that Clement could not add, and she is telling them I am useful about the house. That is offence enough for one afternoon. But the afternoon was not finished. The afternoon had a turn in it, and the turn was a man looking twice at a book. Thomas Wingate was a cotton merchant, and a cotton merchant lives and dies by his accounts, and a man like that cannot help reading a ledger the way you or I cannot help reading a sign on a shop. There was a ledger open on the sideboard. It ought not to have been there. Clement had been at it that morning, pretending to work, and had left it open and wandered off, and no one had thought to close it, because no one in that family truly saw the books at all. They were furniture. They were part of the room. Wingate saw it. From his chair he could read the top of the page, and something in the top of the page made him set down his cup. He rose, with the ease of a guest stretching his legs, and he went to the sideboard, and he turned the book a little toward the window light, and he turned 2 pages back, and then 1 forward, and he read. The room went on around him. Adelaide was telling the vicar's wife about the difficulty of good servants. Josiah was talking prices with the other Manchester man. Clement was eating bread and butter. And Thomas Wingate stood at the sideboard with his finger resting under a column of figures, and when he spoke loud enough to cut across all of it, because he was a man who did not know he was asking a dangerous thing. "Whose hand is this?" he said. "Who keeps these books?" The room did not stop at once. It stopped in pieces. Adelaide stopped and looked over, still smiling. Josiah stopped, and his smile went stiff. Clement stopped chewing. "This is a trained hand," Wingate said. He tapped the page. "This is double entry kept properly, better than my own second clerk keeps it, and he's been at it 15 years. There isn't a farthing out of place on this page. Who does this?" There was a silence then that had a shape to it. I want you to feel that silence, because everyone in the room felt it, even the ones who did not understand it. Josiah felt it because it stood too near the truth. The vicar felt it because he did not know why the master had gone grey. And Adelaide felt it as a small social difficulty, a guest fussing over the wrong thing. And she smoothed it over the way she smoothed over everything, with a light laugh and a light word. "Oh," she said, "only the charity girl. She scribbles our figures for us. It keeps her busy. Only the charity girl. She scribbles our figures." Thomas Wingate looked down at the page again, at the small exact hand, at the columns that came, every one of them, to the penny. Then he looked at the closed door through which the girl had gone. He did not say anything more. Not then. He came back to his chair, and he took up his cold tea, and he sat very quiet for the rest of the visit, and once or twice he looked at the door again, as if he could see through it. A witness from outside had seen the work, not the status. The work, and that changes everything, though nobody in that room but Wingate knew it yet, and Wingate said nothing, and the tea went on, and the guests left as the light failed, and the day closed as if nothing had happened at all. That is how these things are. The moment that turns your whole life turns it in silence, and the people who wronged you go up to bed and sleep well. The family thought the afternoon a success. Adelaide certainly did. She spoke of it that evening with real pleasure, not of the near mistake with the ledger, which she had already forgotten, but of the whole effect, the china, the party, the Manchester men in her drawing-room. And she said a thing to Josiah, in Esther's hearing, that Esther kept. She said, "It does no harm for them to see we can keep a clever drudge and get our figures done for nothing. A clever drudge, got for nothing." That was the whole of the thanks. Esther washed the 9 cups that night. She dried them and she put them back on the top shelf, and then she went into the cold counting-house and she lit her candle and she kept the books, as she did every night, and she found that her hands were not quite steady, which was new. Not from crying, she was long past crying. From something else. Somebody had stood in that room and named the work, not the girl who did it, but the work, and had said it was good, better than a man with 15 years at it. Nobody had ever said the work was good. They had only ever said she was useful about the house. She sat a long time with that. The candle burned down, the figures waited, and she did not yet know what it was she felt, only that the room seemed, that night, to tilt very slightly, as if the floor she had stood on all her life were not quite level after all, and had only now begun to show it. 2 weeks passed. 2 ordinary weeks. The apron, the fires, the back stairs, the books at night. And then a letter came. It came with the ordinary post, and Esther took it in, because taking in the post was one of her tasks, and she nearly set it on the hall table with the rest before she saw the name on it. She stopped in the hall with it in her hand. She turned it to the window. And she read, in a clear commercial hand, the direction on the front. Miss Esther Croft. She stood very still. I want you to understand what that was, because you have a name and you have always had it, and you cannot easily feel the size of this. In 11 years no one had called her Croft. In 11 years no one had called her Miss. She had been Esther, and then the girl, and then the charity girl, and now here was a letter, a real thing with a stamp on it. That gave her back the surname a clerk had written the day she was born, and set the word Miss in front of it, as if she were a person a letter could be sent to. Miss Esther Croft. She read it 3 times standing in the cold hall, and her thumb moved over the ink of her own name. She did not open it there. She had learned all her life to do private things in private. She put it inside the bib of the grey apron, against her, and she went about the morning, and it lay there warm all day, and only at night, when the house was aibed and she was alone at the high desk with her candle, did she break the seal. It was from Wingate and Hale, Manchester. It was from Thomas Wingate himself. And it was first an apology, which no one had ever offered her for anything, that he had made her the subject of talk in a room where she was not free to answer for herself, and that he had thought of it since with discomfort. And then it was an offer. He wrote that he had seen her books. He wrote that a hand like hers was a rare thing and a valuable one, and that it was being wasted, and worse than wasted, in a house that did not know what it had. He offered her a place, a salaried place, in the counting house of Wingate and Hale in Manchester. £80 a year, a room of her own in a respectable house, and her name, he wrote, her own name, on the ledgers she kept, because a clerk of Wingate and Hale signed the work she did, and was paid for it, and was known for it. £80 a year. She had never in her life held a wage. She was got for nothing. That was the whole point of her. She was the economy of the house made flesh. And a room with a door. And her name on the work. She read it 3 times, as she had read the front. Then she set it down on the desk, on top of the mill's open ledger, and she looked from the one to the other. From the letter that named her to the book she kept for people who would not. And she looked at the book properly, now the way Wingate had looked at it, from the outside. She turned to the page she did not like to turn to. Because Esther knew a thing about the mill that no one else in the house fully knew, because no one else in the house did the figures. She knew that Marsden and Son owed the bank £2,400. She knew the margin the mill ran on was thin as the bread and butter she cut, and that it was her nightly management, her chasing of small debts and her holding off of small creditors, and her exact knowledge of exactly how thin the thin was, that kept the whole thing from showing. The mill did not float because Josiah was clever. The mill floated because a girl with no wage sat up every night keeping it off the rocks by an inch, and no one had ever thanked her because no one had ever known. She sat there in the cold with the candle low, and she understood 2 things at the same moment, and the 2 things together were larger than anything she had understood in 18 years. The first was that she had never been charity, not for one single day. A charity is a thing a house pays for. She was the thing that paid. She was not a cost the Marsdens carried out of Christian duty. She was the beam the house stood on, and they had called the beam a charity, and made it wear an apron, and told 9 guests it was useful about the place, and the second thing was worse and quieter, and it settled into her like cold water. They knew. Not the whole of it, perhaps, Adelaide, maybe, truly did not know a ledger from a hymn book. But Josiah knew. Josiah knew his son could not add, and knew the books were kept, and knew who kept them, and had chosen, for 11 years, not to pay a clerk, because he had a clerk already, for nothing, in a grey apron, who did not know she could ask for anything. The word charity was not a mistake. It was the lock on the door. As long as she believed she owed them, she would never think to leave, and she would keep the beam under the house forever, for the price of her keep and a grey apron and the privilege of being named in front of company. For a long time she did not move. The candle guttered. Somewhere in the house a floorboard settled, and the thing that had begun to tilt on the night of the tea now came the rest of the way over, slow and complete, and set her down facing the other way. She did not feel rage. That surprised her, later, when she thought of it. She had expected, if this ever came, to feel rage. What she felt, instead, was very clear and very quiet, and it was the feeling of a sum coming right after years of not balancing. She took a clean sheet of paper. She trimmed her pen. And in her small, exact hand, the trained hand that a Manchester merchant had stood up in a drawing-room to praise, she wrote one line to Wingate and Hale, and it was the first line she had ever written in her life, purely for herself. She accepted the place. Then she drew the mill's ledger toward her, and she opened it to the last clean page, and she dipped the pen again. Because she had decided, in that same still hour, exactly how she would leave. Not with a scene, not with a word at the table. She would give them no scene to tell against her, no ungrateful outburst to repeat about the town. She would leave them the one thing they had never valued and would not know how to miss until it was gone. She would leave the books perfect. Every column, every entry, every farthing of the £2,400 set down plain and true, balanced to the last coin, so that the whole real state of the house would lie open on the desk for any man to read the moment she was gone. Not a lie among them. The truth, finally, in full, in her own hand. It was the only sentence she was permitted to write, and she meant to write it flawlessly. She sat up that night and she began. The candle threw her shadow tall on the counting-house wall, a thin girl on a tall stool in a grey apron, her pen moving steady down the ruled page, and the house slept above her, warm and well-fed, and got for nothing, and did not know that the floor had already begun to go out from under it. Outside, the mill stood dark against the river. In 2 weeks she would be gone, and they would come down some grey morning to a folded apron and a squared ledger and no girl at all. But that is the next part of the story. For now there is only the candle, and the pen, and the quiet, and a girl finally writing her own name at the bottom of a page, and in her apron pocket, cold against her hand when she reached for it, was the office key. She had lifted it, that very night, from its nail. For a fortnight, she was exactly the girl they thought they had. She rose first. She banked the office fire. She carried the tray. When Adelaide wanted her seen, she was seen. When Adelaide wanted her gone, she went. The grey apron stayed tied at her waist through all of it, and she let it. It was a costume now. She knew that. A costume is a thing you can take off. Nobody in that house noticed a single change in her. That was the whole art of it. But every night, when the last lamp went dark upstairs, she went down to the counting-house and she worked. Not the day's ordinary work, the other work, the true work. She was closing them out. Column by column, page by page, she was leaving the books so plain that a stranger could open them and read the whole life of the mill in an hour. The £2,400 owed to the bank. She wrote it out clean. No dressing. No clever spreading of a bad month across a good one, the way she had hidden it for years. Just the number, bare, on the page where it belonged. Some nights her hand shook a little, not from fear, from the strangeness of telling the truth after so long spent making it look prettier than it was. Then came the near thing. It was a Tuesday. The letter from Wingate and Hale, her letter, her name on it, Miss Esther Croft, She had left it a day too long on the hall table under her gloves. She meant to take it up, she forgot, and she came round the turn of the stairs and stopped dead. Adelaide had it in her hand. She was holding it to the window light, turning it over. Reading the direction on the front, the good Manchester paper, the firm's seal pressed into the wax. Esther did not breathe. If Adelaide broke that seal, it was over. There would be a scene, there would be a version of this told round the whole town by nightfall, and it would be Adelaide's version, and Esther would be the ungrateful girl who schemed behind the family that fed her. Adelaide turned the letter over once more. She frowned at it. A letter, sealed, addressed to the charity girl from a Manchester house. Then she set it down. Some tradesman's bill, no doubt, she said to no one. They will write to anybody. And she went in to her tea. Esther stood on the stair a long moment. Then she came down, quiet, and took the letter, and carried it up against the bib of her apron where it had ridden before. Her heart was going hard, but her face, if anyone had looked, was the same face it always was. That was the closest it came, nearly, not quite. The second time was the sun. Clement was a young man with nothing to do and no gift for doing it. One idle afternoon he wandered into the office, the way a cat wanders into a room, for no reason it could name. Esther was at the high desk. She did not stop writing. He looked about him. Something was different. He could not think what. "You've had these out," he said, meaning the ledgers. They stood in a row, squared to the edge of the shelf, their spines dead level. Every one balanced, every one closed clean to the last entry. "I like them in order, sir," she said. That was all. She did not look up. Clement picked one up. He opened it in the middle. He looked at the long-ruled columns, the neat figures marching down, the totals ruled off in ink, and he understood not one line of it. He never had. He had signed these pages for years. He had signed them at the bottom where she showed him to sign, and he had believed, in the vague way he believed most things, that the books somehow kept themselves. He put it back. "Very neat," he said, as if he were being generous. "Thank you, sir." He left. He did not shut the door. She got down and shut it herself. And in her apron pocket, warm now from her body, was the office key, lifted from its nail. He had stood not a yard from it, and never thought to wonder. 2 more nights, and it was done. Every book balanced, every farthing set down. The whole true state of the house laid open on the desk for any man to read. She wrote her acceptance to Wingate and Hale in a fair copy and sent it. She packed a small case. It did not take long. A foundling learns to own little. She left on a Thursday before light. The morning was cold, and the yard was black, and the mill loomed up dark against the paler dark of the river. She had the case in one hand. She came across the cobbles quiet as she could, and there at the gate, where she had not looked for anyone, was Abel Sowerby, the old foreman. He had a lantern hooded low. He had known, or half known. Men who work with their hands often see what men who sit at tables miss. He looked at the case, he looked at her face, and for a moment his mouth opened, and she saw the thought cross him plain, to turn and shout the house awake, to fetch the master, to stop this before it happened. "Don't, Abel," she said. "Soft, please." The old man stood very still. Then he did a thing he had done for 11 years, alone in a house that never did it. He touched his cap to her. "Miss Croft," he said. Her name. Her whole name given freely at a gate, in the dark. "The road's greasy past the bridge," he said, as if it were nothing. "Mind your step." "I will," she said. "Thank you, for all of it." And she went out through the gate, and down the greasy road past the bridge, and she was gone before the fires were lit. The house came down slow that morning, the way it always did. The girl who lit the fires had not lit them. That was the first strangeness. The kitchen was cold. Adelaide came down cross about it, calling the girl's name up the back stair the way she called for anything she wanted, sharp and certain it would come. Nothing came. The cook found the apron first. It was on the kitchen table, folded, not dropped, not flung, not left in a heap. Folded square, corner to corner, the strings tucked under, laid dead in the middle of the scrubbed boards where no one could miss it. The grey apron they had tied on a child of 7, folded like a thing finished with. Nobody touched it for a moment. There is a kind of tidiness that frightens people, and this was it. Josiah came through, and then Clement, and last of all Adelaide, and they stood round the kitchen table looking at a folded apron as if it might speak. Then Josiah went to the office. Some instinct took him there. The key lay on top of the closed ledger. The office key, set down neat on the topmost book, in the centre of the cover, square to the edges, and under it the row of ledgers, spines level, every one shut, every one done. No note, not one word anywhere in that house. The apron was the note. The apron was the only sentence she left them, and it said everything, and it said it in a language they were slow to read. "She's gone to a rival," Adelaide said, the moment the shock let her speak. "Depend upon it, some other Mills turned her head. After all we did, after we took her out of a foundling home and fed her at our own expense for 11 years. Her voice climbed. The ingratitude, the sheer wicked ingratitude of the creature, and that was the story she carried out into the town. Within a day, within an afternoon, it was going round the shops and the parlours of Harnworth. The Marsden's charity girl, the one they'd raised out of pure Christian kindness, had crept off in the night to sell herself to some competitor, without a word of thanks, without so much as a note. Adelaide told it well. She told it with tears in the corners of her eyes. She told it to a returning guest one afternoon, one of the 9, a merchant's wife lately down from Manchester, and she expected the same soft clucking she'd got from everyone else. She did not get it. "Oh, but I don't think that's quite right," the woman said, setting down her cup. "Wingate had it from his own partner. Your girl, Croft, is it? Esther Croft?" She said the name plainly, as if it had always been a name. "She's gone to Wingate and Hale, their counting house, as their clerk. £80 a year, I heard, and rising. They've put her name on the ledgers. On the door of the room even, a small pause. They think a great deal of her, by all accounts. Mr. Wingate said he'd never seen a cleaner set of double entry in his life, and asked how on earth a house like yours had come to have such a hand keeping its books." The room went quiet. Adelaide's smile stayed on her face a beat too long. Then it came off, all at once, like something falling. A clerk, a named clerk, £80 a year and her name on the door. Not a runaway drudge who'd sold herself cheap out of spite. A woman other men of business spoke of with respect. And the question underneath it, the one that hung in the parlour air and would not go away, how on earth had a house like yours come to have such a hand keeping its books? Adelaide had no answer to that. She had never once asked herself who kept the books. She had displayed the girl at tea. She had called her useful about the house. She had never in 11 years wondered what the use actually was. She changed the subject. She did it clumsily. And after the guest had gone she sat a long while, and for the first time it began to reach her, slow and cold, that she had not lost a servant. She had lost the thing the house stood on. Josiah reached it faster, because Josiah went to the books. He took the top ledger off the level row. He carried it to the desk. He sat down in the cold office where no fire had been banked, and he opened it, and he began to read. He was a mill owner. He could read a book of accounts if it was set out plainly enough, and it had never in his life been set out this plainly. He read the note owed to the bank. £2,400. There it was, bare, no spreading of it, no soft handling, no clever carrying of the bad against the good, just the debt, plain, sitting where it had always sat, only now he could see it. He turned back. He read the months, and he saw, slow, what he had spent 11 years refusing to see, the margin. How thin it was, how near the whole thing ran to nothing, month on month, and how every month it had somehow come right in the end. Somebody had brought it right. Somebody had sat at this desk at night, after the house slept, and dressed the accounts so the wolf stayed off the step and the master slept easy and never knew there was a wolf. He had known she kept the books. He had always known. He had chosen not to pay her because a foundling did not have to be paid and a clerk did. He had told himself it was charity going the other way, that she owed him, for the food, for the roof, for the 11 years. He sat in the cold and he understood, at last and too late, exactly what had walked out of his gate before light. Not a charity girl. The beam, the one beam the whole house had been resting on, and he had let it walk out for the price of a folded apron, because he could not bring himself to say, even to himself, that the mill was carried by a girl he refused to name. He shut the book. He did not open it again for a long time. He could not stand what it told him in its clean, patient hand. Clement tried. Of course Clement tried. He was the heir. The books were his now, or so his father said, dropping them on him the way you drop a weight you can no longer hold. "You'll keep the accounts," Josiah told him. "You've signed them for years. You know them." Clement had signed them. He did not know them. There is all the difference in the world. He sat at the high desk on the tall stool in the place she had sat, and he opened a fresh book, and he took up the pen, and he found out in about an hour what he had refused to know for a decade. He could not add. Not properly. Not the way a counting house needs a man to add. The columns would not come right. He would total a page and total it again and get 2 different answers and not know which to trust. He carried figures wrong. He forgot to carry them at all. He wrote a sum in the wrong column and did not see it, and it sat there, quietly poisoning every total that came after. The books that had run for 11 years clean as clockwork began, under his hand, to go wrong. It took about 3 months for the wrongness to reach the world. A supplier went unpaid, not from want of money, quite, from want of anyone who knew the money was owed. Because the entry had never been made, because Clement had not understood it was an entry that mattered. The supplier wrote once, politely, then again, less so. Then he stopped selling to Marsden and Son on credit, and after that the mill paid cash it did not have, or it did not get its cotton. The bank's note came due, the £2,400. It had always been near the edge, that debt, but she had always been there to talk to the bank's man, to show him a clean book and a steady margin and a reason to wait. Now the bank's man came, and he was shown Clement's book, and Clement's book did not add, and it did not reassure anyone of anything. The bank stopped waiting. None of it was her doing. That was the thing. Her hands never touched a page of it after that Thursday. She was 50 miles off in Manchester, at a clean desk, with tea going cold beside a ruled page. The collapse of Marsden and Son was entirely the family's own, their own nature, arriving at last, on the schedule it had always been keeping while she quietly held it back. She had been the only thing standing between the Marsdens and the truth of themselves. She took that away, folded, off the kitchen table. And the truth arrived. Some weeks after she left, there was a dinner at the Marsden house. Fewer guests than there used to be. The kind of dinner a house gives when it is trying to look as if nothing is wrong, and the effort of looking is itself the thing that shows. One of the guests was a Manchester man, the same class of merchant as those who had sat at the famous tea. And over the wine, without meaning any cruelty by it, only speaking of the trade, he mentioned the clever new clerk at Wingate and Hale. "Croft," he said. "Miss Croft. Sharpest hand with a ledger I've seen in 20 years. Wingate won't hear a word against her. Showed me her books himself, laid the whole set out and said, 'There, That's a counting house kept right. He drank. Came out of some mill up your way, I understand. Lucky the house that had her. Luckier the house that's got her now. He did not know. He had no idea he was sitting at the very table she had carried the tray to. No idea that the woman he praised was the girl this house had called its charity, in front of 9 guests in a grey apron. But the Marsdens knew. Adelaide sat with her wine untouched. Josiah looked at the cloth. Clement, who understood least of everything, understood at least this, and went red. The witnesses of the wound had become the witnesses of the correction. The same class of men who had watched Esther carry the tray and withdraw now spoke of Miss Croft of Wingate and Hale with respect at the Marsdens' own table. And she was not in the room. She did not need to be. That was the whole shape of it. She had never once needed to say a word. The books said it. The men of business said it. The empty office said it. Her absence said it louder than any speech she could have made across that table on the day she was humiliated. 50 miles away, at that same hour, she was at her desk. The Manchester rain came down on the slate outside her window, soft and steady, the sound a city makes when it is working. Her tea had gone cold beside her, the way it did most nights, because she forgot it when the columns were coming right. On the spine of the house ledger, in good ink, was her name. E. Croft. Her work carried her name now. Every page she filled was signed, at last, by the hand that filled it. Wingate came through one afternoon with a partner, a careful older man not easily impressed, and Wingate did a thing that told her more than the wage, more than the room, what she had come into. He laid the Marsden books beside her new ones. He had sent for them, or gotten hold of them somehow, in the way merchants get hold of things, the old ledgers from Harnworth. And he set them open on the desk next to the clean Manchester ones, and he said to his partner, "Look here. This set and that set. Same hand. 11 years of it." He turned a page, balanced to the farthing, every month. "Do you know what she was paid for it?" The partner said he did not. "Nothing," Wingate said. "A foundling's keep, her food and a bed and an apron. 11 years of a hand like this, for nothing, because the house that had her would not admit what it had." He shut the old book. "We'll not make that mistake. We pay her properly. We pay her what the work is, and we'll go on being glad we did long after they've forgotten how to add." The proof had always been on the table, literally on the table, on the sideboard, open. The day of the tea, when Wingate turned 2 pages and asked whose hand it was, it had only ever needed one man to look at the work instead of at the apron. An apron is the uniform of the name they gave me. Folding it and leaving it square on the table was the only sentence I was ever allowed to write. That is the truth of the whole business, if you want it plain. They gave her a garment at 7, and a nickname to go with it, and they called both of them Charity. And they wore her, the way you wear a good coat you never paid for as long as the weather held. And when she took the coat off and left it folded, they did not understand for a long time that they were the ones now standing out in the cold. 6 months on, this is how it stood. There was a window in Manchester with rain on the slate beyond it. There was a room behind that window with a door, and the door was hers to shut, and she shut it when she chose. And no one called her name up a back stair. On that door there was a small brass plate, and the plate read, "E. Croft, clerk." She had polished it herself the first week, once, and then made herself stop, because it was not a thing to fuss over. It was only her name. Only, at last, her name. She kept the mill's old apron nowhere. She had left it on the table. She did not want it. A person keeps the tools they've chosen and leaves behind the ones that were tied on them. And back in Harnworth, the story went on, arriving on schedule. Adelaide still told her version to anyone who would sit for it. She had been too generous, she said. That was her only fault. Too soft, too Christian, too giving, and this was what came of taking in a stranger's child and treating it as your own. She said as your own without a flicker, as though she had ever once let the girl sit down at the table she carried the tray to. Josiah had learned one thing at ruinous cost. He now paid a clerk, a real one from Manchester, at £120 a year, half as much again as Wingate paid Esther, because a stranger with no gratitude to trade on must be paid the full rate. He paid it, and he still could not keep the mill. Because it was never only the bookkeeping, it was the mind behind it, the nightly care, the person who treated the accounts as if the house were her own when the house had told her it was not. You cannot hire that at any wage from a man who has no reason to give it. He had had it for nothing, for 11 years, and had not known it was the rarest thing he owned. Clement still signed pages. He signed them at the bottom, in the place he had always signed, only now there was no one to fill them in first. So he signed pages that said nothing true. And the mill's real estate went on being a thing no Marsden could read, and the banksman came again, and each time there was less to show him. And once, in the second month after she left, a single letter came to the counting-house at Wingate and Hale, forwarded on, the direction written in a plain working hand. It was from Abel Sowerby. It was short. Old men who work with their hands do not waste words on paper. It said the mill was much as she'd expect. It said the master looked older, and at the end, before his name, it said one line that she read 3 times and then folded away and kept, which is more than she kept of anything else from that house. The gate isn't the same, Miss Croft. The gate isn't the same. No, nothing there is. A house keeps the servant it depends on, and treats her as kin, and pays her what she's worth in coin and in her right name, or it loses her, sooner or later, to the first person who bothers to look at the work and say whose hand it is. There is no third road. Those are the only 2. And a nickname, said with a smile, in front of every guest, is not kindness dressed as fun. It is a wage cut with a smile on it. They thought the apron marked her as theirs. It marked what they were. And the day she folded it and set it square on the table and walked out through the gate before the fires were lit, she was not the one who lost anything. She had her name. She had her door. She had rain on the slate and a ruled page and tea she could let go cold in peace. They had a folded apron on a kitchen table and a book of accounts that no one left in that house would ever again be able to read. If you have ever been the one holding a house up while it called you a burden, if you have ever folded your apron in your own way and walked out to somewhere they finally said your name, then tell me. Comment the town you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels.